Monotype.
Welcome to Creative Characters from Monotype, a show where we meet the people working at the intersection of type and everyday life. I'm your host, Carl, and this week I'm joined by three of my favorite colleagues here at Monotype, Executive Creative Directors Charles Nix, joining us from New York, and Tom Foley and Phil Garnham, joining us from our office in Shoreditch in London. So we have a really unique episode today, as each of you is hosting your own interview with an independent type designer. Why don't you tell us why you wanted to do an episode like this?
For me, I think it's really just about, supporting the industry, and I really want to just celebrate that, the diversity of the industry, the backgrounds coming out of this type world right now. And there's just so much exciting stuff happening, especially in the young foundry kind of scene.
I would love to do about 150 or 200, maybe 300 of these kinds of episodes, because there's so much going on right now with young foundries and creativity in the typographic space that I feel like there's just not enough time in the day to sort of draw attention to the creativity out there.
So Phil, why don't you start off by telling us a bit about the studio you met with?
Yeah, I spoke with Mark Bloom at CoType, and he's just making the nicest design work, really modernist, really lively, and he's such a great ambassador for creativity. He collaborates so much with and partners with other, creatives in the industry. Just such a lovely guy as well.
And Tom, who did you speak with?
I speak to Naïma Ben Ayed, who's an independent typeface designer and graphic designer. And she's really interesting because she worked in a very commercial space, but she's now moved into independent practice. And she is a really good example of contemporary Arabic type design. But her work at the same time is very cool, very contemporary, quite stylish, and her points of inspiration are quite interesting. She talks about how she collects or writes down the colors she sees in places she travels to, and has a very specific way of collecting inspiration. So she's also just really cool and really nice.
XYZ is Ben Kiel and Jesse Ragan, and the three of us have been in the same room multiple times over the past couple of decades. Which is to say that a young foundry doesn't have to be made of young people. They're not old, but as independent designers, they're relatively new. XYZ is a new thing. I deeply admire both of them, and you'll hear them say that they make useful and quietly offbeat fonts. And as you'll hear, they're really thoughtful designers too. So go look at their work, and you'll see how talented they really are.
Thanks, guys. We're going to kick this off with Phil and Mark Bloom at CoType. So without further ado, take it away, Phil, and hope you enjoy.
I'd like to introduce Mark. He's the founder and creative director of CoType, based here in the UK. He's also now the applied typography teacher at Labasad School in Barcelona. And Mark and I have known each other for years, way back during your agency days at MASH, and also, your time as design director at Socio. And I think your passion for type and just the way you use type in typography is very direct and very clean and minimal. And I love the way I love your work, that. So I guess to kick things off, I wonder if you could share a few words around, what drew you to type design.
Firstly, thanks for having me, Phil. I'm actually a graphic designer by trade. I run my own design studio for 14 years called Mash Creative. And then around, I think 4 years ago, I set up my own CoType foundry. So the transition from graphic design into type design has been slightly unconventional. And I think the reason I fell in love with type design was one of the first projects that really helped me as a graphic designer gain exposure within the design world. And that was for Icon magazine. It's an architectural magazine, but they actually approach a lot of graphic designers from around the world and ask them to rethink something that is in the public domain as a fictional brief. And for that, I redesigned the Royal Mail logo, and as part of that, designed a typeface to sit alongside that called RM. And I think that's really where my kind of love for type started, and then has evolved since then, I guess.
That Royal Mail project really stood out to me. And at the time, I thought maybe that was an interesting thing to do, I guess. Like the fictional rebrand. It gives you a lot of freedom, right, to explore ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. I think obviously one of the frustrations I'm sure many graphic designers will tell you is when you design something and a client pushes back on it, and then you think, well, hold on, you're hiring me as a professional. In my professional opinion, I would do this, but that doesn't always happen. So obviously with a fictional brief, there are no restrictions, and it means you have total freedom to do what you like. And as you probably know, Phil, my speciality within graphic design and in Mash Creative was with brand identity design.
Mm-hmm.
Because of that, it meant I had a passion for developing custom word marks. And I think off the back of designing my own custom word marks, that passion and love for type evolved from that even further.
Yeah.
And it got featured on like all the big design blogs, which was for me as a, you know, kind of setting up a fairly new graphic design studio was amazing. And off the back of that, I had a lot of graphic designers emailing me saying, was I going to make this typeface available to buy? Up until then, I'd never had any intention to release it as a typeface. And you might recall, actually, because you very kindly, off the back of knowing each other and meeting at design meets, I think you very kindly offered to look at it for me and I think give it a fairly strong critique, I think we should say.
That sounds like me.
Which to be fair, I think it's good because when I've worked in graphic design studios, I've always called it like the no bullshit policy. You know, if you've got something to say it. There's no point in kind of skirting around it. And I kind of appreciated that. And I think if anything kind of made me realize if I was going to get into this world that I really needed to up my game. And I guess that did happen and kind of evolved with the latter typefaces.
I think it's really interesting if you look at your portfolio now. You came into the industry with that very strong sans serif collection, built on that with Aeonic and other fonts. But what I really loved was seeing Orbicular recently, which is like, really ornate, delicate serif. You know, not high contrast, not trying too hard to be like flashy, but just really super functional and really, you know, it's very sensitively done. I think that's a fantastic typeface.
I really appreciate that, and especially from you, Phil, because as you know, I kind of have always looked up to your work and the fact that you are a trained type designer, whereas I've kind of fallen into it. So I do appreciate that. Designing a sans serif is certainly not easy, but I think for me personally, designing a sans serif is easier than a serif. And Orbicular was my first serif design. And I kind of would say I struggled a bit with it. You know, I really wanted to make sure it was as good as it could be. And I was happy with the end result. And then I was fortunate enough to get in contact with Matt Willey. I hope I've pronounced his surname correct, from Pentagram. I'd always loved his editorial design work and asked him if he would be interested in designing the type specimen for Orbicular. Much to my delight, he said yes. So not only did I have a typeface that I was extremely proud of, but also a type specimen, but designed by, in my mind, one of the best editorial designers out there. So
amazing. I think that's one of the things I love about this industry as well, is like type is so omnipresent in every form of communication. It's the thing that binds everything together, and like I love that collaboration. Like you get to work with your heroes, the people you really admire. Do you feel that as well as a new sort of type designer on the scene? Do you like get into
yeah, absolutely. If I go back to the graphic design days, there's so many design studios that I looked up to and really admire and still to this day do. And then when I see these studios using my typefaces in projects, it's hugely rewarding. Even seeing my fonts in use on TV commercials is amazing. And even now, I think I drive my family mad, because every time I see a TV advert that comes on that uses one of my typefaces, I'm like, look, it's one of mine.
So what's your creative process then in general? Do you start with pencil? Are you starting with brushes? Are you drawing stuff in the sort of traditional sense? Or are you more interested in a on-screen kind of purist approach?
Yeah, so what I've actually started to do, and there's a new typeface release that I'm hoping will happen at some point this year, is very much inspired by traditional calligraphy, but will be in a serif and a sans serif. What we're trying to achieve is 4 different typefaces in one. It's not necessarily a brand new idea, but something I'm quite excited about doing. So we have like a serif, a sans serif, then we also have a serif stencil and a sans serif stencil. And that really, when I started drawing that, I didn't want any inspiration from other typefaces or to be swayed in any way. So I actually kind of created a brush in Illustrator and started drawing the brush strokes, kind of taking that into glyphs, which is probably slightly unconventional from a type design point of view, but I think it just drew upon my relationship with Adobe Illustrator and the fact that I've been using it for so many years, and it just felt a bit more intuitive to design it in that way.
Yeah, I'm a big advocate for Adobe Illustrator, to be honest.
That makes me feel better.
Yeah, because so many type designers are adverse to it, that as an approach, but I very much like designing in context. So like, I think you can't just go straight into a black and white software screen to design type. You need to understand the color, you need to do that in photography, you need to be able to move stuff around. You can't settle on the first couple of letter shapes you draw, you have to like mold them, and that's my approach anyway.
No, that makes me feel better, Phil, knowing that you also use Illustrator.
Cool. So you mentioned your team as well, like how many people are CoType?
So CoType is myself as full-time, and then I have several freelancers. So I have my colleague Ben, who handles a lot of the licensing and the business side of things. I have Diana, who has been hugely instrumental to the growth of CoType Foundry over the years. And then more recently, I've started to try and employ graphic designers to help with social media content, because up until fairly recently, I've always produced my own social media content. Again, being a graphic designer, that's what I enjoy doing, and makes me feel like I've still got a hand in the graphic design world. But as I'm sure you can probably agree to as well, but there comes a point where it's just too much work for you to do yourself. So I've started working with Holographic Studio in Croatia. They designed the last type specimen poster for RM Mono, which was the monospace version of RM Neue. And also people like Semiotic Design in Greece. I've done quite a few projects with them. So Demetrius is the creative director then. He's a really great guy, and I'm happy to call him a friend. So it's quite nice when you actually start out as a working relationship with freelancers or studios or whoever that may be, and then actually end up forming close friendships with them. And I think probably most of the people that I end up collaborating with, I would call friends as well.
Yeah, I think that points to like why type and social media kind of go hand in hand as well. Like it is like a real creative community pursuit. Like it's just so many people involved in making it happen and spreading awareness. I think it's great. And I think actually now you think about the type industry or what it has been, and even the very recent past, it's become, I feel like it's becoming a lot more supportive. Like there's like a new culture around type emerging where type designers back other type designers. And I don't think that's ever, 10 years ago, I don't think that was the case at all.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, on social media, I follow a lot of type foundries and support them. And if they do a nice typeface release, rather than get jealous and go, oh, I wish I'd done that, I support them. So, nice work,
Yeah.
And again, it's supporting the industry as a whole. And I don't see other foundries as competitors. I think ultimately everyone's doing their own thing, and support where necessary. Yeah, absolutely.
Is there like a studio ethos, or is there like a specific point of view of the studio? Was that even in your head at the time when you started the company?
What started out as an ethos was designing typefaces for graphic designers. I never wanted to design a typeface just for the sake of releasing a typeface. Where I launched CoType Foundry with 4 typefaces, and in 3.5 years, I think that's now grown to 13. What I'm trying to achieve here is that if a graphic designer comes to CoType Foundry, to make sure that we have something for all purposes. So, i.e. a monospace typeface, a quirky sans serif, kind of a more workhorse serif in terms of RM Neue or Ionic. And that's what I've been trying to do over the years. And I think I kind of went really hard for the first couple of years trying to fill that library as quickly as possible to make sure I filled those gaps. And now I'm kind of slightly by choice, but also from necessity, taking my foot off the gas a little bit to say, okay, where I might have been releasing 3 typefaces a year, it may only be 1 typeface a year now. And as certainly for 2023, I know we have one more typeface release at some point this year. When that will happen, I don't know, or I hope it will happen this year. 2024, I don't know yet, to be honest. It may well be that we don't release any new typefaces. I think the obvious choice is to expand upon what we already have. So adding additional language support, the fact that Ionic is the best-selling typeface, I think it makes sense to produce a super family of that. So condensed, extended, adding additional language support such as Arabic, and Hebrew and things like that. So yeah, I think that's kind of the goal going forward.
What surprised you about, in terms of like the business side of running a type studio? Was there anything that, shocked you as a new business owner?
I think I'm fortunate that because I run Mash Creative, the graphic design studio, for I think 12 years prior to CoType, I had quite a good understanding of how a business works and business relationships, and the fact that as a business owner, how you have to juggle so many things. So I think that was quite good in that sense. I think probably the licensing side of things, because obviously we're talking about legalities here and trying to kind of come up to speed with all the legalities behind licensing. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm very fortunate that I work with my colleague Ben, who handles a lot of the licensing and business advice, and he's been absolutely fantastic over the years.
Yeah, I think like type design is often seen as very litigious as a pursuit, right? Maybe fairly or unfairly. What does success look like to you as a business, as a foundry, as a creative?
For me, kind of getting recognition and exposure for work. No one knows for sure when they release a typeface whether it's going to be a success or not. And I think I can say for sure that Aonic has been a success, thankfully. And as I say, continues to be our best-selling typeface, and you see it more and more out there in all different manner of environments, from banking to people like Virgin Hyperloop, which is a really cool one, to space exploration and all sorts. It's amazing. And I think for me, that's always nice. I think if you work hard on something to get recognition and seeing that being used, that's how I see success. But I think lastly, just to say, I love what I do. Even when I have very stressful, busy work days, I never dread going to work in the morning. There's still that excitement and that passion for what I do. And I think if I ever lose that, then I'm probably shouldn't be doing what I do anymore. So yeah, again, just keeping that energy and that passion for what I do.
Yeah, it just occurred to me, you used to do quite a lot of work with the Design Museum, right, in London?
That's right.
I think like that is when I first saw your work.
When I started out as a graphic designer with my own studio, I had no savings, had no clients. I really had to work bloody hard to build up a reputation. And I think that's why I still have this passion and desire now to succeed in everything I do, is because there's this drive to just do well in what I do and make a success of it. I don't ever want to just give in and go, oh, that will do, So when I started out in the graphic design world with Mash Creative, I was like, okay, how am I going to get my name out there as a graphic designer? So I ended up designing my own, I guess, range of products. There were things like t-shirts and mugs and pens, USB sticks, Oyster card wallets, and it was a really simple idea. And it's quite funny that even now I see it. I went to, I think it was H&M the other day, and they had a gift voucher card, and it said, "This is my gift voucher card." And that was basically a very simple idea. And it was like, I'm just going to brand everything with "this is my." So it'd be like, this is my pen, this is my USB. And it might sound maybe a bit corny now, but I think 12 years ago, it was nothing like that out there, the simplicity of it.
Oh, that's epic. Yeah, I was just curious about how you feel about type design in the future in terms of AI, metaverse, all of this stuff, ChatGPT. How's that going to affect type design? What do you think?
The honest answer, I don't know. I see designs that have been produced by AI. I think certainly for the short term, I think our jobs are safe. Long term, who knows?
To be frank, it's refreshing to not know, because I think so many people say that they do and spout off all these ideas about what it could be, and I could do the same, but I appreciate the honesty. Well, Mark, thank you so much for joining, and catch up soon.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Phil. Take care.
To learn more about CoType, visit cotypefoundry.com or follow them on social at CoTypeFoundry, all one word. Up next, we have Tom Foley speaking with Naïma Ben Ayed. Take it away, Tom.
So hi everyone, I am joined by Naïma Ben Ayed, graphic designer and typeface designer, specializing in Arabic and Latin scripts. Naïma is also an occasional educator and an old friend and a very talented designer. So welcome, Naïma.
Thank you, Tom. I'm very happy to be here. Tom and I go way back. We were working together at Dalton Mag. I joined in 2012. I think our main collaboration was Intel.
Yeah, it was. Yes, you designed the Arabic for Intel. We've worked together at Dalton Mag for about maybe 4 or 5 years. And I've been following Naïma's career since because she's a great designer and I love her work. It's very stylish and beautiful. So to start off, Naïma, what drew you into the field of typeface design?
It's a series of events and encounters. My goal was to become a graphic designer, so I was studying graphic design. And while I was doing, I think, BA3 graphic design year in Paris, I had a semester with Sébastien Morlighem, who is a type history specialist, and we had with him a course that was drawing letters by hand. One assignment I remember was drawing by hand a DVD cover for Fritz Lang movie in like black and white letters. So that kind of things. And I really enjoy his class, and I missed the last class of the semester. And then he very kindly sent me an email saying that considering how I enjoy drawing letters and things like that, maybe I should take a look at Estienne School. I didn't know much at all back then about type design, but I went to the open doors of the Création Typographique Master, and the course was a mix of type design, graphic design, typography, calligraphy, everything letters, really. And I really enjoyed everything they were doing. So I decided to apply to the school and got in. And then during those studies, we encountered Huda Abifares from the Khat Foundation. And at the time, she had just published the first typographic matchmaking project. And it really marked me, this idea of, bridging cultures through type design. And like this idea really resonated with me and my own design research or attempt, like making my Arab heritage visible and tangible has always been something I was using creativity to do. And when I encountered Huda and her book, I realized that maybe this could be done through type as well. And then that same year, I applied to do graphic design Erasmus at the KBK school in The Hague. And there was no more room in graphic design, but they said, if you want, you can come to type and media instead. So I said yes, of course. And I was in type and media for 3 months. My first year in type design in Paris was also quite a marking time. And I've met then Francesca Bolognini, who became a very close friend and also a colleague at Dalton Mag. And we stayed in touch. And after I started to work as a graphic designer for a couple of years after my studies, I was looking for a job and I wanted to move abroad. And I was applying to different places and studios. And she sent me an email at some point to say, hey, Dalton Mag is hiring if you were ever interested to work as a type designer. And back then I really gave it a good think, thinking am I ready to give up graphic design because I really enjoyed that. But then I also really, really wanted to learn more type. So I applied at Dalton Mag, got a job offer, and it all happened very quickly.
You were bringing your Arab culture and background through your work, and then I suppose you spotted something in typography or typeface design as a discipline that probably allowed you to bring those interests to the surface. Where do you find inspiration, or where do you look for inspiration in your work today, given the journey you've been on? Do you feel like it comes from the same places, or do you look elsewhere now, having done this for a number of years?
I think it really depends on what kind of projects I work on. If the brief is, a sort of very simplified nasr for text and display matching Latin, grotesque, geometric, which has been the most common brief that I deal with actually for Arabic, I think it's more about looking at the script and thinking about different ways to approach it. So in this case, it would be more looking at calligraphy manuals. But aside of this brief, I love to look at graphic archives. There are so many great inspirations, like old posters, packaging, magazine covers, and things like that. Where it's mostly lettering, but there was such like creativity in the letter forms. I also love to collect old signage, beautiful, clumsy, or like I love imperfect letterings, and I always photograph them when I walk around, either in London or anywhere there is Latin and or Arabic letters. I love to do that. I think also maybe more for graphic design, I always take notes of color combinations that I love, whether it's on something that a friend is wearing, a pair of trainers, or like, something that I see, and then either I take a picture, or if I don't have time to take a picture, I write down the colors. I have notes on my phones of like, Tunisia, summer 2022, dark green, cyan blue, black, and a little bit of white. And then maybe I'll use again this combination for like a type specimen or things like this,
Those notes you make on your color combinations, it would make great poster panoramas. You can imagine, dark green, cyan, yeah. Tunisia 2003. Amazing.
It's kind of poetic, I think.
So you're obviously a collector. So you seem to have this, a lot of designers are, this impulse to collect and record. And every time you get inspired to make a note of that in case you forget. But you often hear about graphic designers or designers collecting visual material, but what I find fascinating, you're collecting color combinations by writing them down. That's really cool. That's so cool. But again, it sounds like you have this sort of general awareness of your environment, and you've obviously got an interest. As a type designer, you have to have an interest, I think, in like the history of letter forms, and you mentioned historical archives as well as part of your inspiration. So how does that stuff then manifest itself in how you work today, or in your process, or is it just like a pretty natural continuation for you? Is it just something that happens all the time?
It depends. Sometimes I create a typeface and it's directly linked to a specific group of archive materials that has happened. So maybe I give an example. So when I worked on a typeface called La Contraste that is now published at Future Fonts. So a few years after I met Huda for the first time, I think in 2015, she invited me to take part in the latest edition of Typographic Matchmaking. So this collaborative process of designing typefaces that includes Arabic and Latin. And I was teamed with Redouane Chetouane, who's a Moroccan designer. And Redouane and I decided to work on this sort of like skeleton in common for our different styles in the family. And in our process, we looked at a lot of manuscript for the Maghrebi style, which was the style the Arabic font was based on. But then we also realized that we were building a story around the idea of exchanging layers of history and time. And in the second study trip that we did, that was in Andalusia, we found like several examples of Latin lettering, like on different, like in the streets, where you had clearly Latin letter forms, but somehow with an Arabic flavor. And we were quite interested also in, the aspect of storytelling of those letters, because of course Andalusia was centuries ago part of the Islamic Empire, and somehow it felt like signage in today's time were kind of reminiscent of that cultural influence, and somehow that element came in our typeface and the very core concept of the typeface, which was playing with contrast, etc.
Collaboration seems quite key, right? Working with other people and the connections you have with people and places. So is that something you also seek out? Like, do you try to collaborate as much as possible with different kinds of people, or with the same people?
Yeah, absolutely. I really love and crave collaborations. And at the moment I work with a lot of different people in different places. Sometimes it's, of course, like type foundries who commission me a font or a series of fonts, but I also at the moment collaborate with a graphic designer, Parasto Bakman, who's Iranian diaspora in Sweden. I collaborate with people in Lebanon, in Egypt, in Switzerland, in Portugal. So it's very like international. I think that's my favorite aspect of my work, is when creatives meet and do things together. I mean, I love working with other type designers, but I think when it's people from different disciplines, it's also like quite rich and interesting. And yeah, I think it's something that I didn't expect to happen as much in my practice, but it's definitely a big part.
Do you think then that informs a kind of a certain point of view or a purpose or even like an ambition of your practice or your studio? Or is it more organic than that?
I think it is both organic and intentional. Like I tend to look at things as like they happen in an organic way, but then when I look back, I find that everything is actually making a lot of sense and has been like consistently going in the same direction, even if it's of course not a straight line. So I guess it's unconsciously intentional, maybe.
Maybe intentionally organic is probably maybe a way to say it too. And I think you have that sort of way about you're very easygoing and you have that very perceptive nature, but you tend to kind of take things as they come. So I can see that. That makes sense. And then on the flip side, so is there anything about running your business or doing this full time and professionally and also as an independent studio that like has surprised you or even liberated your practice or anything that, was an unexpected challenge? Like what's it like now running your own studio?
I think one thing that surprises me and I didn't expect is to run a studio from home. I think I always saw myself, probably I'm talking pre-COVID time, but like moving around a lot and having a bit of a nomadic practice. That's one aspect of it. Then I would also say that I didn't expect for the sort of educational side of my practice to take that much place. And it's not that I teach that much, like I run workshops occasionally and it's always like short formats, but practicing has really made me want to, sort of like create educational material or tools that is accessible to wide and novice audiences or to put stuff out there. And so we are working on a sort of workbook for Arabic type design for beginners, basically. And the idea of this workbook is to be downloadable online for free and for anyone who wants to give it a go. And of course, this is not, a workbook that is going to make you a professional type designer, but it's sort of like bridging the gap between the discipline and the wide audience and like how do you make like little bridges so the discipline can become a bit more accessible.
It's a really interesting, very relevant topic to that point of access because there are so many barriers to learning a discipline like typeface design, particularly in a lot of the Arab-speaking world. So what does success look like for you as a typeface designer and a studio practice?
I think I find joy in witnessing when something that I have done is resonating with others. And I think that maybe is my idea of success. Like I found it very heartwarming when it happens, and it can take many forms. It can be designers that I admire using the fonts I designed. It can be young designers or students reaching out for feedback or interviews and saying that they've been following my work for a while. That those simple things are found always really, really nice. And maybe I would also say when getting new commissions and collaboration that you're really excited about effortlessly, meaning that the work come to you rather than you have to look for it. This is, I guess, somehow a form of success, maybe. I don't know.
That's a great feeling when someone knocks on your door or sends you an email and says, you're amazing. Could you do this for me? Which I'm sure happens all the time. I mean...
Yeah, when I see that my work resonates, and it can also be when I design something that I can show my family and they understand and they're touched by it, that's somehow also for me is a form of success.
That's amazing. I mean, if you can make a typeface and then show your family and they understand, that's success, because my family have no idea what I do still. It's been really nice chatting to you.
Thank you, Tom. It was a great pleasure chatting, and I look forward to crossing paths again.
To learn more about Naïma's work, visit Naïma Ben Ayed Bureau naimabeenayed.com. That's NAIMABENAYED bureau.com, or follow her on social at Naïma Ben Ayed Bureau. Last but certainly not least, we have Charles Nix talking with Ben Kiel and Jesse Ragan from XYZ Type. Enjoy.
So I'm really excited today to talk with Ben Kiel and Jesse Ragan of XYZ Type Foundry. I want to ask some really fundamental questions, sort of get at what makes XYZ such a exciting upcoming type foundry. So let's start with where each of you came from. Ben, why don't you go first?
All right, so I guess I fell in love with type as an undergrad through letterpress printing, and that was a big part of my undergrad education. And I made probably maybe not the world's worst typeface, but a real bad typeface in my senior year as an undergrad for my capstone project. And then didn't know where I was going to go with type design, but I worked as a designer for a while and then ended up wanting to go to grad school, and I ended up at the University of Reading in England. And I was a dumb 20-year-old, and I didn't really have like a plan for after that. The plan was like go to grad school and then figure it out. But after that, House Industries was hiring, and so I applied for a job at House, and I've been doing type since. And I was there for about 6 years, and then some more years after that as a contractor. And so that's how I fell in love with type through printing, and then this is what I do now.
And where was your undergrad at?
So my undergrad was at Washington University in St. Louis.
Tell me a little bit about the letterpress department there.
We had a pretty decent type collection. Ken Botnick, who is a fine book printer and designer, ran that side of the department. It was really integrated into the design education. Like that was where our type 1 class was. So it was through metal and wood type. We have like a really nice collection. I teach at Washington University now and like run the book studio sort of, along with my colleague Becca, but we have like a ridiculous wood type collection because it came from a rubber stamp company here in town, and they just used it for molds for making rubber stamps. So it's a really nice collection.
Nice. How about you, Jesse? What drew you to type design?
I always trace it back to high school when I happened to have a class in commercial art, which was a really rare thing, but we had different sections, and one of the sections was typography. So I actually learned a little bit about typefaces and type classification in that, maybe 4 weeks of the program at a younger age than most people did. And this is like mid 90s. Around the same time, we got a home computer with a modem, sort of pre-web. I was dialing into bulletin boards and found that there are all these fonts there, which are probably pirated or, freeware or terrible knockoff fonts, and started downloading those and organizing them and studying them and trying to understand the differences between them, the similarities, and why one typeface evoked a different feeling than another. So I became really fascinated with fonts at that point, and I think that really is what led me to study graphic design. What made me want to major in graphic design was my interest in type. So I went to Rhode Island School of Design for that, and then when I got there, actually met people who do make fonts and realized this is actually something that I could do myself. I don't think it had even occurred to me at that point. I just wanted to be close to letter forms in some way. I had a teacher, Charles Gibbons, there, who's a type designer, who taught elective in typeface design. That was my first experience actually doing type design, and then subsequently with Cyrus Highsmith. So I had the opportunity to do a lot of type design in undergrad, which again, at that point was pretty rare. And straight out of school, got a job at Heffler and Farrar Jones, worked with those guys for almost 4 years, then kind of kept on that course. I've never really changed my mind about wanting to do something different with my career. It's only ever been, is this actually viable? Those have been the times when I've wondered if I could be a type designer, was, can I sustain myself doing this? And there have been times when that seemed unlikely, but somehow it's worked out so far.
A great segue into what we could call part 2, which is the sort of studio ethos, or what it is that makes XYZ XYZ. Walk me through the origin story of the XYZ studio.
So I think Jesse and I met at a TypeCon 2005 in New York. And that was before I was at House. And then when I was at House, we hired Jesse for a bunch of projects that I sort of art directed, I guess, or design directed. So Jesse and I started a working relationship there. And when I left House, Jesse hired me. The short version is we hired each other, then started a foundry. And pretty much how it happened, we did a project. Jesse hired me for a project that eventually became our typeface Cortado. At that point, it was a custom project for MP Creative for Aldo shoes. And that was a design that lived for Aldo for a fashion season and then went off exclusivity. And when we had it, we were like, okay, what do we want to do with this thing? We both sort of had some ownership of it. And so we put it up as just without a Foundry label, just as a test of the partnership. And that went well. And then we decided to formalize the partnership. Spent a lot of time coming up with a Foundry name, could not decide on one. So the secret origin story is Jesse got an email that .xyz domains were on sale from his domain registrar.
And I thought, hey, that could be a name.
Yeah.
We should have done this sort of newlywed game style where I have Jesse go off camera and I ask Ben the question and then I ask Jesse for the same thing. But Jesse, anything you want to add to it or details of that you can test?
No, I think my story would have been about the same. I can say that I was working freelance and doing projects for House Industries, as Ben said, and I really enjoyed working with Ben. I appreciated the perspective that he brought to the projects. When I got this project for Aldo, and had a crazy turnaround time for it, I knew I couldn't do it myself. And Ben had, at that point, left House. So it seemed like, oh, well, he's someone who has dealt with type timelines. He's dealt with project management. He has dealt with script typefaces and open type coding. So these were all things that I was up against that I felt a little in over my head on. So it seemed like a natural partnership to form for that one project to subcontract to him. So that was the first time I hired him for a project. And it went really well.
There's something lurking under both of those answers that will lead nicely into this next question. What is the XYZ ethos, or what's your point of view or purpose or sort of driving ambition? Like if you had to paint the XYZ manifesto in 100 words or less, what would it be?
Quietly offbeat fonts, which I think is nice. I think Karen Litherland, when she was doing some writing for us, came up with that one. And I think it also maybe captures a bit because our work is not revolutionary per se. I don't think that we're really trying to change the game with anything we're doing, although, maybe a little bit in more subtle ways. I don't know.
So quietly offbeat is a great phrase. And it does sort of imply that there is a sort of boisterous and very on-beat mainstream that you're reacting to. I wonder if you could sort of compare and contrast to sort of say these are the ways in which we are different than what we consider the mainstream of typography.
Well, I think the first thing to say is that different is not better. We have to find some kind of voice for a Foundry. We need to sort of figure out what is our strength, what are we drawn to, and what can we lean into as the kind of stuff we make. So I think that's sort of what comes naturally to us.
For a retail library, we're not cranking things out like multitudes per year. Projects tend to simmer for us. Not for client work. Those are much faster paced projects. But we want to take time with the things that we release retail. We're trying to find this place where we're releasing things that we think are useful in a variety of contexts, but have a little bit of quirkiness to them. That's where the offbeat part comes in.
Typography often gets compared to either music or food, and I'm going to fall into that same trap. But I have this feeling of having grown up in the 70s about the band, that when I first heard that music, it felt to me like music that always existed. I suppose there's some aspect of that in Neil Young and a lot of that sort of American music of that time, because it was borrowing on sort of musical tropes from earlier. But it was obviously different and unique. And when I look at the work that the two of you have produced, I have that sort of same feeling that this stuff has existed. It's not copied from anywhere, but it's drawn from deep understanding of the history of typography and the sort of variety of typographic form. And it finds essence and presents it in a way that still manages to be unique, which I suppose is a tribute to your craft and your creativity. That's an unprovoked plug for...
Yeah, I was going to say, thank you. And that's going up on the website very soon.
Designing a typeface is just making a bunch of little decisions that add up to some end result. And I think that when in doubt, usually when I'm faced with a decision, I think, okay, what's the traditional solution to this? What's a calligraphic solution? What's a typographic solution? And then how can I reinterpret that in a way that's less expected, but still owes something to that heritage. So hopefully that's maybe what you're seeing in the work. That, I think of like my typeface aglet or the superfamily aglet. It has a lot of calligraphic underpinnings to it, although it's a very constructed geometric design. So it all goes back to thinking about, okay, well, which way would the pen go when you get to this part of the letter form? And how can I capture that in a geometric shape? And hopefully that kind of thinking that's happening under the hood in those infinite little decisions that are made leads to something that feels natural. And it's not an obvious solution, but it just feels right.
Where do you look, the two of you, for inspiration, or who or what inspires you? And if you have any type heroes, go ahead and name them.
I can say that obviously I'm inspired by the work of Rudolf Ruzicka because I particularly have done a couple designs that are based on his work. So he's someone who I feel a close affinity to. My typeface study is based closely on one of his concepts for a typeface that was never completed.
I think Gerrit Unger, who was a professor of mine at University of Reading, is a reference point for me. There's a part where at Reading, like, Swift is everywhere. And so like there's a de-Swiftification that everyone has to do for their designs because it's like the signage typeface for the university. So it literally is everywhere. I think like Gerrit is a model of mentorship, teaching, authenticity to form. For me, other type heroes have always been Eric and Joost, Eric Van Blocklen and Joost Van Rossum, for both their way of making a lot of things possible for independent type designers and the tools and technology stuff that they've made, but also they're really, really, really good designers and they do both really, really well.
So let's walk a couple blocks away from home then and move away from type heroes into other sources of inspiration. Where do you look to find ideas for type, or what inspires your forms beyond typography?
Jesse, I think that you have a whole series of work that really looks at carving as an influence. As part of your undergrad, you really did study punch cutting, which is like very unusual. We're talking at this point handfuls of people who have done that. And your design cedar, you see it in study. There are a bunch of things that I see in your work. You look at the marks that you make when you sculpt something and not draw something, and you translate them into digital type, but I think in a really unique way.
Mm-hmm. Ben is much more than me a graphic designer, or sees things from a graphic designer's perspective in ways that don't come to me as readily. And I think that when Ben is working on type or lettering, he's often saying to himself, what would make this really fun to use as a graphic designer? What would make this useful? What would pull me in if I were using this in a design project? And that's a sort of eye and an angle that I'm not as skilled at getting. So that's something that I really value in his approach to type design.
Yeah, working at House gave me a deeper appreciation of design with a lowercase d and not a capital D, and things that outside of the traditional canon of graphic design with a capital D, thinking about vernacular signs, design done by non-designers, and really appreciating the quality that those things have. And so I always kind of look at those things now as sources of inspiration.
Ben, as you're collecting images of vernacular type or type in our everyday environment, where are you doing it?
It's a hard question to answer right now because I feel like I haven't been anywhere in many years. I live in St. Louis, and so I think I look for the things that I see around here, and St. Louis has a pretty great tradition of sign painting, and so there's still some of that stuff around. And yeah, industrial lettering is kind of everywhere here.
Like Ben, I do respond a lot to vernacular lettering and the lettering I see on a daily basis. I lived in New York City for 20 years, and I feel like during that time, I was really overstimulated all the time by so much type, so much lettering. You have to close your eyes if you want to get away from letter forms in that city. And I feel like I put a lot into my memory banks. I took a lot of photos, absorbed a lot there. And then 2 years ago, moved a little bit upstate to the city of Beacon, New York, and things are much quieter here. I think there's maybe 1% the number of letter forms in my field of vision when I leave the house that there were when I was in New York City. And that makes a big difference in the way that I process things. And it's a relief. My anxiety level went down in many ways after I left New York City, but especially by not being constantly reminded of work or have my mind constantly trying to process design details, because I think my mind works in a way that I'm always problem solving. So I think looking at hand lettering on a signage or even a font on a subway ad, I'll see something and think, oh, that's an interesting letter form. That's an interesting capital R. But I don't think the other letter forms around it are working. So how would I take that R and how would I build a system around that? And my brain starts going on these tangents and trying to problem solve or figure something out or think, how would I solve this problem in a way that can be really beneficial and really motivates a lot of my design work. I think that's maybe part of what the Aglet series came out of. That's what my typeface export came from, was taking an idea from something else and figuring out how I would create the world around it with my own voice. So yeah, I think that's maybe the way that I respond to visual input, is more sort of seeing something and maybe disagreeing with the way that it was executed and wanting to do it my own way.
That seems a very natural sort of art directorial way of seeing the world. The constant critique going on in any designer's mind as they navigate the transportation system in New York City.
I always have this fantasy of having a vacation house where there's no letters. There's like the Tupperware in the cabinet has the letters sanded off. Everything's in like brown paper bags with no label printed on it. And it could spend a month just not looking at any letters. That's my dream of being able to like fully relax.
I'm interested to hear whether Ben has had the same sort of fantasy. Because, yeah, I've entertained the idea of a typeless world and like what it would take to create that, even in a sort of microcosm, which is a weird malady to have as a type designer, to sort of say like, okay, is there a Faraday cage that sort of keeps the typography? I want to pivot just a tiny bit. It's not unrelated, but what has surprised the two of you about running a type business together? Because half of a type business is type and the other half is business. Have there been any things that have really surprised you or that you were not prepared for?
Yes. And I would disagree. I think it's not half and half. It's probably like 25% type design and 75% business on a good day. And I think the thing for us that is so obvious in hindsight, but we were so blind to, was that the marketing bit of running a foundry, like when we started our partnership, like, okay, we can make fonts, we can design fonts, we can produce fonts. Like that's all you need, right? You just need a website, you can put stuff up, and if it's good, people will come, Field of Dream style. And actually, that's not really true. And there's this big thing called marketing, which is, I know, deeply ironic, having worked the places that we have worked, to kind of be ignorant of that fact. But we were for a while. And for me, the surprise has been the effort that we've needed to put into marketing, which should have been obvious from the start, but it kind of wasn't. And I feel like at times we play catch up.
I think the complexity of a Type Foundry website is something I didn't fully understand, and how much work goes into building that, even when, we're working with designers and developers who are doing the actual work. There's so many things that are not exactly clear-cut about how you package the typefaces, how you deliver them, how you ask the questions that need to be asked in the process of establishing what license someone needs.
I think another challenge, or another thing we didn't expect, was figuring out how to divvy things up. And with projects, with designs that we've both worked on sort of personally, those things are hard to hand off to someone else because we have a bit of a emotional investment in them. And with Polymode, that was a really rich collaboration with them and between Jesse and I. And so I think neither of us feel like we have like personal ownership of that design. It's more of a collective ownership. And so it's been really useful for us to be able to get it out into the world and to improve it. So we're working with Jem Eskenazi right now, who's a type designer, who's in Barcelona, to extend the weight range of that typeface. And Jem is bringing his ideas to it and sort of seeing the system and making it better than it was before, which has been really rich and fruitful for us. So finding rich collaborations has been the challenge and the reward of running a Type Foundry.
What does success as a Type Foundry look like to you?
We're hoping to get to a place where XYZ Type can be a little bit more self-sustaining, where we both can spend the majority of our time devoted to XYZ's projects and also hopefully have more people working closely with us.
Well, I got to tell you guys, I admire your work. I've told you that. I've told Jesse that many times. Ben, you're hearing it for the first time today, but I have a deep and abiding respect for what you do, and I look forward, as always, to seeing what you guys do next. So thanks so much for the time today.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
To learn more about XYZ Type and check out their library, visit xyztype.com or follow them on social at xyz_type. Thanks for listening. As always, look for a link to our blog post in the show notes of this episode and check out monotype.com/podcast to read about all of our prior guests. If you've been enjoying our podcast, please go to Apple Podcasts or Spotify to rate and review this episode. And if you really like us, subscribe to the show and share us with your friends. Creative Characters is brought to you by Monotype and is produced by Christopher Olin, Mia Sullivan, and Marie Tabarez. We'll be back with more episodes soon. Take care, everybody.